Story 1. Things keep changing when I look in the box. When I was 8, I found a diorama box. You may have seen one before or even made one for school or scouts or whatever. I had no clue what it was called at the time, just a long wooden box with a circular hole on each side and several small diamonds of frosted glass embedded across the top. I found it behind the abandoned Stonebrook Middle School, sitting like a gently placed present on a pile of broken pallets and old insulation. Even not knowing what it was, I could tell it was special. There was no way to open it, and its weight, its design, even the way the wood was carved, spoke of something out of the ordinary. And then I put my eye up to the box. Sunlight flowed and fractured from the opaque glass above, sending soft tendrils of luminescence curling up the walls and around the figures inside. I was seeing inside a house, probably the living room. The people were abstractions, just barely recognizable as people at all, and yet somehow I knew about them. That one was the mother, that one the daddy. There were a couple of kids, and on the arm of the couch a grey lump that I thought was a cat. All of them seemed to be sitting together, watching a box that I figured was a television. I didn't get what the point of any of it was, but it was weird and fancy, so it felt like treasure to me. I took it home with some nervousness, afraid that my parents might think I stole it and take it away. When my dad noticed it that night, he asked where I'd found it. I knew enough to lie and say the woods instead of behind Stonebrook. Something bad had happened there when I was little, and even now I think most people avoid it. He considered me a moment and then picked it up, turning it over in his hands before putting his eye up to one of the holes. Huh. That's a weird thing, isn't it? Guess it's game night, huh? Ruffling my hair, he handed it back. Good find, sport. You'll be a pirate yet. I grinned with relief, but behind that was a growing sense of confusion. Game night? I waited until I was back in my bedroom, and then I turned on the bedside light and looked in the box again. It had changed. Instead of being in a living room, now they were gathered around what looked like a dining room table. Still a father and mother, and 2 kids. I could even see the cat sleeping on a sideboard against the far wall. And on the table, tiny but distinct, was a board game. I didn't tell anyone about the change, of course. They'd think I was pretending or lying at best. At worst, they'd believe me and take it away. Instead, I looked at it every day, sometimes for hours. I was smart, enough to hide how obsessed I was with it, though sometimes it was hard. I didn't want to miss anything, after all. The scenes were always in the same house, but it would move from room to room, and the number of people and pets would change over time too. But I definitely felt like it was always the same people, and house overall. Most of the time, for all the magic of the changes, the scenes themselves were pretty mundane. Just a family living their lives, doing the things they do. Tiny statutes devoid of features that somehow managed to always tell me exactly what was going on and how they felt about it. I remember when the son got into a fight in school, when the daughter had her first ballet lesson, the times the husband and wife fought, and the times they all came together to celebrate or comfort one another. When I was 16, I saw a change coming over the father. He wasn't sleeping much at all, and when he did, it was sitting up in a chair away from his wife. They seemed to be fighting more, everyone spent less time together, and within a few months I started to worry they might split up. The scenes didn't change every day, so I had to wait until the weekend to see the latest developments. The father was holding the mother, and the children were hugged in around them too. I actually cried a little when I saw that. Whatever he'd been going through, I guessed they'd gotten through it. Then 2 weeks later, he murdered them all. That night it happened. He was back on the sofa, a laptop in his lap. I could tell it was late at night, even with the light streaming in. The shadows thrown against the floor and walls looked like demons surrounding him, and as I watched, wanting and unable to comfort him, I saw something tiny appear beside him, on the sofa. It was a knife. Despite all my untold hours of watching the thing, this is the only time I ever saw it change. The movement of the shifts hurt my brain to the point that I started pulling away after the second one, and not just because of what happened in the scenes. He goes to the son's room first and stabs him in the ear, bearing down on the blade with his weight. Then the daughter. He cuts her throat and belly open, The scene actually shifted twice there to make sure I saw him make both wounds. Then there was the wife. That scene shifted more slowly over the next 12 hours or so. When the final transition came, you couldn't tell she had ever been a person. Just bits of abstract someone, spread across the bed and floor and even the walls. After that, I never looked in the box again. I bought a safety deposit box where it has stayed ever since. You might think I should have destroyed it or thrown it away, but I couldn't quite manage it. Somehow I think I knew that, well, even though I was done with it, it wasn't done with me. That became very clear a few weeks ago. I haven't been myself. Terrible dreams and worse thoughts. I don't sleep, I fly off the handle at the smallest thing. Once I realized that I recognized what I was doing, it only made it that much worse. The past few days I've really tried to do better, but I can feel it isn't going to last. I have to do something. My plan had been to write this all down, read back through it, and if it didn't seem totally insane, give it to my wife in the morning. It might not make sense to her, but at least she would know what was on my mind, except just now I've seen it next to me. The knife, I've never seen it before. Well, not up close and not for a very long time. I tell myself I have to get rid of it. Get it away from me, away from my family, but I can't quite do that either. Maybe it's because it's not really my choice, or because it's what I really want. Or maybe it's because of what I just saw. Because I did get up just now for a minute and try to throw it away, even if it was just into the yard, so long as it wasn't in sight or arm's reach. I opened the front door and was rearing back to throw the knife away when I saw it, hovering among the murky nighttime shadows of the tree line. It was an eye. Monstrously gigantic. It looked this way and that, both terrifying and terrifyingly familiar. Because I knew that eye, didn't I? Knew the monster it belonged to. Well, it was me. The ranger warned me to leave the trail before sundown. I didn't listen. I've always preferred hiking alone. It's not that I hate people. I just like the silence. Out there in the woods, there's no pressure to talk, no deadlines, no emails. Just trees, wind, dirt, and me. So when I stumbled across a barely mentioned trail called Dead Pine while planning a weekend trip up north, I was intrigued. No official website, no recent trail reviews. Just a few blurry photos and some outdated directions on an old hiking forum. It sounded perfect. The drive took me far off the main roads and into thick wilderness. I passed one tiny gas station with hand-painted signs and a general store that looked like it hadn't been restocked since the 90s. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was already past 3 p.m. I figured I'd do a quick loop, maybe 2 hours tops, and be back before dark. As I stepped out of the car and started lacing up my boots, I heard footsteps crunching on gravel behind me. I looked up and saw a park ranger walking down the path toward me. But something was off. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Gaunt face, pale skin, twitching under one eye. His uniform was official, but the name tag had been scratched, so badly I couldn't read it. And he wasn't wearing a hat, just a mess of thinning gray hair that blew wild in the wind. "You planning to hike this trail?" he asked flatly. "Yeah," I said. "Just a short one before sundown." He didn't smile, didn't nod, just stared at me. "You need to leave before dark," he said. "Do not be on the trail after sundown." I blinked. "Okay." I was planning on heading out before then anyway. He stepped closer. His eyes looked glassy now, almost like he wasn't fully seeing me. "No," he said. "I'm not warning you because of wildlife, or weather, or getting lost. I'm telling you because it gets inside the trees after sunset." My skin prickled. "What does?" He opened his mouth like he was going to say something else, but no sound came out. Just silence. Then he shook his head, turned around, and walked back toward a weathered ranger station just beyond the trees. I stood there for a few moments, unsure if I should even go in. But I'm not exactly superstitious. I've heard plenty of overdramatic ranger stories in my time, people just trying to keep tourists cautious. So I did what I always do. I adjusted my pack, locked my car, and stepped onto the trail. I didn't know it then, but that was the last normal moment I'd have for a long time. Dead Pine Trail lived up to its name. The trees here weren't like the ones I'd hiked through before, tall, narrow, and unnaturally still. Even when the wind picked up, their branches didn't sway. No bird song, no insects, just this low, ambient hum, like the whole forest was holding its breath. About 30 minutes in, the path started to narrow. Roots tangled across the dirt like veins. A thick carpet of moss muted my footsteps. I paused at one point to take a drink of water and realized I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no rustling, just silence. Until the whispering started. First I thought it was the wind. A faint hiss in the distance, like leaves brushing against each other. But it wasn't random. The sound had a rhythm, a cadence, like words spoken just out of reach. I spun around, scanning the trees. Nothing, just trunks and shadows. I told myself it was in my head. Dehydration, maybe. Too much caffeine on the drive up. Then I saw it. A circle of stones just off the trail. 7 of them, each one worn and cracked, arranged in a perfect ring no more than 10 feet across. I hadn't noticed it on the way in, and I sure as hell hadn't stepped off the trail before now. The stones had markings on them, faint, angular, symbols scratched deep into their faces. Runes, maybe? I'm not an expert, but they looked old, very old. I stood there staring at the circle for a long time. The whispering got louder the closer I stepped. I felt a kind of pressure in the air, like something didn't want me there, like the forest was watching me. I backed away slowly and checked my watch. 6:12 p.m. Shit. The sun was already dipping low. The light had gone from golden to a dull, smoky gray. I didn't have time to explore. I needed to turn back. But as I retraced my steps, something was wrong. The trail didn't look the same. Trees I'd passed earlier were gone. A fallen log I remembered stepping over was missing. The forest felt denser, like it was closing in, and no matter how far I walked, I never passed any of the landmarks I remembered on the way in. I pulled out my phone. No signal, GPS spinning like crazy. The blue dot twitched in circles, like it couldn't tell which way I was facing. Then, somewhere behind me, snap a branch broken underfoot. I froze, snap, crunch, snap. It was pacing me. I spun around and shouted, "Hey, who's there?" No answer, just that same damn humming noise. Soft, slow, familiar, a melody now. Not random, almost like a lullaby. It seemed to come from inside the trees, echoing from the trunks themselves. And then, between 2 narrow pines, I saw movement. A shape, thin, too tall to be human, pale, standing completely still, as if waiting for me to notice. I didn't stick around to get a better look. I ran. The humming followed. I don't know how long I ran. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. Time stopped making sense somewhere between the second and third time I passed the same dead tree, a splintered pine with a deep gash down the middle that looked like a mouth. No matter how far I went, the trail looped. I kept ending up back near the stone circle, though I never saw it directly. I'd catch glimpses of 1 or 2 stones through the trees, just enough to know I hadn't gotten away. And the humming, God, that humming, was getting closer. Not louder, closer. Like it was moving, like it was following. My legs were jelly, my lungs burned, but something in my gut told me if I stopped even for a second, it would find me. I stumbled downhill, crashing through underbrush, branches slapping my face. At some point, I dropped my water bottle, then my flashlight. I didn't care, I just needed to get out. That's when I saw the figure again. Not running, not chasing, just standing, half hidden by a wide pine tree. Not behind it, inside it. I blinked, and for a split second, I swear the bark of that tree shifted, like skin crawling. Over muscle. The thing's head tilted slightly. It had no eyes, no face, just a suggestion of features, like something was pretending to be human, and failing at it. Its mouth, wide and unnatural, was still open. The melody was coming from inside it, and I realized something I hadn't before. The song was changing. It was copying something. It was copying me. I took off again, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every root and rock grabbed at my boots. Trees seemed to lean in closer. No wind, no birds, just that tune, now whispering from every direction. Then I saw lights. My car. I don't know how I made it out, but suddenly I was at the edge of the woods. Again. The gravel lot was exactly how I'd left it. My car was parked under the dim glow of a busted floodlight. Only, the ranger station was different. Windows boarded up, paint peeling. The whole thing sagged with age like it hadn't been used. In decades, I ran up and banged on the door, no answer. I looked inside through a crack in the wood. Cobwebs, empty shelves, dust everywhere. I turned back toward my car and froze. The trees at the edge of the forest were moving, not swaying, shifting. Bark splitting open, revealing pale slivers beneath. Mouths, dozens of them. All humming, all in sync. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropped them, and slammed myself into the driver's seat. As I peeled out of the lot, I swear, just for a second, I saw a shape in my rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, waving. It's been 3 days. I haven't slept. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see bark cracking open and something smiling inside. And last night, I walked past the woods near my apartment. There were no pines there before. But now, there's one. Just one. And it's humming. There is no Costa Rosa. For many years, I didn't want to tell this story. It is painful, embarrassing, and to a greater extent, unbelievable. But if I'm ever to move on, I need to put this behind me for good. So yes, I'm going to talk about Costa Rosa. A lot of you are probably going to go, what's Costa Rosa? And yeah, that's fair. It was a niche hashtag that circulated certain social media circles back in 2017. I was a sort of background community manager for a group of influencers. No big mainstream names, but they had a decent set of followers. They were all into the more obscure corners of the web, focusing on a particular age group, a social issue, or some kind of special interest. These were people who got sponsorships by staying content, approachable, sponsor-friendly, and authentic. In truth, they had all media coordination groups with managers, stylists, and a whole slew of background people making sure their content was filtered and greenlit. I was part of this background team. For obvious reasons, I can't say their names. Some of them are still around in one way or another. Others I will refrain from mentioning out of respect for their loved ones. Now, Costa Rosa. For weeks, me and the coordinators had been running into a problem. There was something we called an expectation of excellence, and it was getting impractical to coordinate localized trips and bookings for content creators on different continents. We had a vegan guy in Cardiff and a friendly middle-aged, kinda sorta red state baker in Tennessee. As you can imagine, we had to do a lot of varied work. So after weeks of dwindling interest, we had to funnel attention into something new. Someone had this idea of a joint resort. We reached out to various locations about sponsorship deals, and in return, we'd make their place look gorgeous. It was the kind of push where we could put all eggs in the same basket and get some great content out of it. Problem was, no one was biting. Then someone said, "Does it have to be a real place?" It sounded like a stupid question. I mean, it had to be. You can't go somewhere that doesn't exist, but the more you think about it, you can make anything as real as you want it. We could say it's exclusive, someone said. Invite, only. A private island kind of thing, another chimed in. We just need a name. And an area. Some Central American island. Think Belize, Panama, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is in Africa. No one cares. We finally settled on a fictional island off the coast of Costa Rica. All we needed was a name. I'd been quiet up until that point, and the silence was getting to me. So I just threw it out there. Let's call it Costa Rosa. The Pink Coast was our make or break project. We came up with all kinds of crazy ideas. We had a food guy who pulled out 3 kinds of crab recipes and called them cultural secrets of the locals. One of our video guys added that we could edit certain videos to make the beach look pink. We came up with names for streets, hiking trails, local fishing boats, all of it. We made a list of every fruit you could find on the island. We made it all up, just so that if anyone asked, we'd have the answers. It got to the point where people were loudly clapping at each other's lies. I vividly remember when someone came up with the idea of a bioluminescent waterfall, saying it could be the proof of the island's beautiful biodiversity. And I'm not going to lie, I was into it. This was the kind of business we were in, and Costa Rosa was this huge, breathing dollar sign. And of course our influencers would be into it. You just had to frame it all in a way that made them look like heroes, inspiring the little people to step out of their comfort zone and aim for the stars. I was having some trouble privately, though. I graduated college with a bachelor's in communication. That's where I met my fiancée. But I sort of stumbled over the influencer business. I've always been a bit pear-shaped, and working with these larger-than-life beautiful people made me feel like I was part of the in crowd. I'd never had that, which was something my fiancée couldn't really understand. We got into a ton, though fights about it. When you work from your phone, you're never really off the clock. You see something cool when you're out shopping? Tag it, send it. You hear about some interesting place downtown? Check it out, talk to the owner, get a foot in the door. People around me got tired of never really just hanging out with me, and in hindsight I can see why. They were always the third wheel. But when our first Costa Rosa content was launched, things turned bad. We were having some of the worst fights ever. I thought it was inspiring, he thought it was fraud. I argued that we weren't selling anything, but he argued we were selling a lifestyle. Either way, it got to the point where we postponed the wedding. I suppose it was a good thing we'd been too lazy to renew our passports, or we'd be out thousands of dollars from a non-refundable honeymoon. We didn't officially separate, but the distance from the couch to the bed seemed longer every day. In about 2 weeks, the whole project went off the rails. Sure, we were getting clicks and we had a couple of sponsorships lined up, but there were some things we hadn't anticipated. For example, there was another group in Eastern Europe that hijacked the whole thing. They made their own videos with their own influencers going to Costa Rosa. They never even talked to us about it. They just stole the whole thing. They weren't even discreet about it. We had a couple of other small-time copycats. Some people mentioned turning down an invitation to go there on Twitter. Others mentioned how they'd been contacted, but refused to go for one reason or another. There was this one London-based singer who claimed she was going there, only to cancel at the last minute and showing her fans a gift bag from the organizers on a live stream. But somehow, things got worse. Scams, fake raffles, and lotteries. Like this video to get a chance to go to Costa Rosa kind of stuff. And it was moving some real money too. We were panicking. We'd never signed off on that. Our talent hadn't either. But what were we supposed to do? If we came clean, our careers were over. One in the team came up with an idea. We could go somewhere that is as close to Costa Rosa as possible and show the real thing. That way, we had our backs covered. We could point to the map and say, that was it. Sure, we could admit taking a few artistic liberties, but it would cover our tracks, and somehow we found the perfect spot. I didn't know the real name of the place. We all agreed to just call it Costa Rosa, as to not slip up. It all went by so fast. There was a group call, something about boarding tickets, someone waiting to pick me up. I lost my luggage at the airport, but there was no time to stop. All I had to do was get there, and everything would sort itself out. I slept through the flight and mumbled through the transfer. There was a boat somewhere. Temperature shifted and the language on the signs looked different from home, and within a few hours I was standing with my bare feet buried in the pink sands. They really were pink. Now, we'd made up a lot of stuff. About Costa Rosa. Sure, the pink beaches was one thing, but there was also the fog. We'd called it a refreshing summer phenomenon. A heavy fog that rolled in from the coast every morning, causing this white, almost cyan mist. But there really was a mist on that island. I could barely see my hands in front of me as I stepped through it. Seeing this place for the first time felt like a Disney movie. You can't really believe spots like this really exist. It was almost exactly as we'd described it. Pink sands, fruit trees, colorful birds. No bioluminescent waterfall though. Then again, those were only seen at night. I couldn't believe how lucky we'd been. This might as well have been the real thing. We were a group of 16 people, 4 of which were influencers. The rest of us were all behind the camera. We were all saying the same thing. It felt like stepping into a dream. It was too perfect, and we knew perfect. Perfect was our business. There was no one there to greet us, so we didn't know where to go. Our bags must have been taken to the hotel. We figured they'd gotten the arrival time wrong, so we spent most of the afternoon just relaxing by the water, watching the tides roll in to tickle our feet. It really was beautiful. I remember dozing off for a bit as the others tried to get the hotel manager on the line. Someone suggested we walked, but we had camera equipment and not a lot of patience, and well, We weren't in a hurry. It was mid-afternoon when Jay woke me up. Jay was one of our cameramen, a Southeast Asian guy with these big round glasses. No matter what you said, he'd just nod and smile. Not because he didn't understand, but because he'd found out early on that it was best to just kind of go with the flow. Lean into the vibe. There's people, he said. I think we're heading out. I groaned and got up, only to see a dozen strangers flocking around our team. A lot of smiles, hugs, and welcomes. Pleasant people. Then I realized these people didn't live on this island. They weren't even crew. They were tourists. I can't believe we're here, someone yelled. I thought it was a scam, another said. Hand to God, I thought it was a scam, I did. People were coming up to shake our hands and chat. All of them were viewers of our content in one way or another. They recognized our talent immediately, who shot me a half-smiling, please, get me out of here kind of look. We took charge and sorted things out, making sure we all got some space to breathe and making it clear that we appreciated the enthusiasm, but that this was a private occasion. The tourists didn't seem to mind. They weren't coming down from their high anytime soon. I can't believe we're here, one said. It really feels like a dream. We walked. There was no point in standing around, and we needed some space from the tourists. I couldn't believe how bad our luck was. This place had been thoroughly vetted, and the chance of someone else finding it the same time we did was astronomical. It wasn't just unlikely, it was close to impossible. It was one of our talents, Kim, that finally spoke up. A short woman in her early 30s with a big personality. She had this marriage advice / calisthenics themed channel. Can whoever booked this just call the hotel? She said. It's been hours. Everyone stayed quiet. We didn't have a clear answer. We all just kind of pointed at one another and figured someone who didn't show up was the one who made the booking. But it left a strange thought. This had all gone very fast. Suspiciously so. We spent most of the afternoon and the early evening following a long road, picking fruit straight from the trees and drinking from the island springs. We met a couple. More tourists, but they didn't seem to recognize us. They didn't even speak the language. They were just sort of happy to be there. It was all so fantastic. You didn't feel tired no matter how long you walked. You didn't get that hungry or thirsty. There was fresh fruit hanging from low branches and exotic smells coming from blooming flowers. There was this one blue-looking sunflower that was about as tall as me just off the side of the road. Everything just felt right. Promoting a place like that would be the simplest thing in the world. But there was also a strange quality to it, and I couldn't help but to notice it affecting the others. I first saw it on Jay. He was looking down at his hand, slowly opening and closing his fingers, like he was trying to sense something. When he noticed me looking, he reached out and put his hand on my cheek. I pulled back a little. Sorry, he said. I didn't know you were real. I laughed it off, and he did too. We never found the hotel. We did find a few road signs, but no one was paying enough attention to care. The roads had the same names as those we'd brainstormed in our group chat. Some of them hadn't even been made public. As the sun began to set, the island changed. We could see a faint glow coming from the water, and there was a serenade of hissing insects in the distance. Even at its coldest, Costa Rosa was comfortable. Some folks stripped down into their underwear. It all had this sort of spring break kind of vibe, like we weren't actually there to work but to enjoy ourselves. Some folks were pulling pranks. Two guys went skinny dipping. One of our producers found a mossy spot near a rock and took a nap. And Kim, the faithful calisthenics person. She was making out with one of our social media managers. By the time I walked away, they'd gone to second base. But I paid most attention to Jay. There was something about him that didn't seem right. He was pulling off these slices of bark from a tree and rolling it into a pointy end. He poked his finger with it over and over, as if to see if he could feel it. I don't think he did. He was smiling too much. It was hard to concentrate. I was constantly shaking my head, trying to focus. I must have looked like I was having a seizure, but I doubt anyone was paying attention. They were busy dipping into their own kind of nonsense. As the sun set on Costa Rosa, I fell asleep in the moss. It was the warmest, kindest sleep I'd ever felt. Perfect temperature, perfect softness. Who the hell needed a hotel anyway? By morning, the fog rolled back in. I could barely see my own hands. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I got there. It took me a moment to mentally retrace my steps. the flight, the boat. It was all a blur. All that mattered was that I'd made it to Costa Rosa. Everything else was secondary. It looked like everything had been covered in a soft cloud. I could see a couple of silhouettes in the distance, but I couldn't tell who was who. I sat there taking in the atmosphere, eating a fresh fruit for breakfast, though I couldn't remember where I got it from. When the morning fog finally cleared, there weren't many of us left. Some had wandered off, others had made their way back down the road. There were also these hiking trails that I suspect some had followed. Both Kim and Jay were gone, and no one seemed to have a plan. We were all distracted, me included. As I walked around, feeling the gentle moss between my toes, I tried to think of what I'd packed. A pair of socks, a shirt, anything. I could vaguely imagine the suitcase, but I couldn't make heads or tails of what I'd packed. I remembered getting into a taxi, or maybe an Uber, but then there was this blank space. There was a check-in somewhere. A ticket, maybe. I tried to think of my fiancé. We were still together, officially, but there was something we'd talked about that was nagging me. Not our fights, but something trivial. It really bothered me, like an itch in the back of my mind. It took me a while to realize I'd wandered around in a daze. I had no idea where I was anymore. There was no path. The others were gone, and yet everything was pleasant. It must have been around noon when I finally saw some other people in the distance, a small group gathered around a clearing. My first instinct was to wave at them, but my chest tightened. There was something off about them. Giving it that second of hesitation, I noticed a couple of things. All three of them were fully undressed, and they were strangers to me. There were two young men and an older woman. One of the men was carrying something in his right hand, and they were all looking down at the ground. I kept my head low and listened from a distance. "It feels so real," the man holding something said. "Like I'm really here." "It's amazing," said the older woman. "It's perfect." They shared some fruit and had a laugh. I was just about to get up when I saw the man holding something turn to another angle. He was holding a gun. He pointed it at something on the ground and fired 3 rounds. The others cheered. "I've always wanted to do that," he smiled. "I love this." They turned their attention northward, away from me. They must have heard something, chuckling. To themselves, they walked away, leaving me to sneak ahead to see what they'd done. The soothing tropical silence cast a stark contrast to the sudden gunshot. I almost choked on my own spit when I saw her, face down in the undergrowth. Kim, shot dead at close range. More people had arrived at Costa Rosa that morning. It's like everyone had been invited and arrived at the same time. They all said the same thing. This was a dream, too good to be true. They couldn't believe that there really was a Costa Rosa and that they were there to enjoy it. No, for them, this was too unbelievable. I stayed close to a road, listening and watching, hoping to see someone I recognized. But it was getting harder to concentrate. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It had to be a dream. I barely felt my fingers when I pinched myself. And yet, for some reason, I knew I shouldn't give in, even though it was easy to do. I heard gunshots throughout the day. There was smoke in the distance, and by dinner time, when I went to the beach, I saw 2 women playing in the ocean, trying to drown one another. They laughed and cheered as they fought, scratched and strangled one another. They could barely feel a thing. It was just a funny game, but one of them dipped below the surface and the bubbles stopped. And yet, the other kept laughing. The more people I met, the more nightmarish they seemed. Some of them brought things to the island, like the man with the gun. One brought chains, one brought barbed wire. There was this one guy walking up and down a hiking trail with some kind of Star Trek sword. Others seemed friendly enough, casually, chatting with people they recognized. But sometimes they'd just act out and attack, seemingly at random. In the afternoon, I heard someone yell. They'd spotted one of our talents. I think it was the baker. All of a sudden, people were rushing to find them, cheering as they bound and leapt through the sands. "I've always wanted to meet her," someone said. "She has such a lovely voice." "I can't fucking stand her," another muttered. "Self-centered bitch." It's like they were thinking out loud. It wasn't a conversation, just a constant verbal stream of thought. I followed them for a while. A few of them saw me, I think, but they didn't care. I wasn't the famous face they were looking for. I looked like anyone. I didn't want to think of what they might do if I tried to intervene. I was outnumbered, but as I watched from afar, I didn't pay enough attention to my immediate surroundings, where a familiar face crept closer. I didn't notice Jay until he was right next to me. I barely recognized him. He'd fashioned a shiv from a broken camera stand, and he was half covered in dry blood. And yet he was calm as can be, slow blinking like a warm cat resting on the porch. He reached for me and my instinct was to pull back, but he could have that shiv in my neck in an instant. I froze. He slowly ran a bloody hand across my cheek. That was it. I've always wanted to do that, he whispered. You look so soft. He nuzzled his nose against my ear and sighed. Then he stepped away. You're so nice, he mumbled. I like you. And that was it. He wandered off, having let his intrusive thoughts win. Maybe I was lucky not to be running through his mind any more than that. Maybe to him I just looked soft. Maybe that was all there was to it. Others weren't so lucky. They got hold of the baker and dragged her out of the woods. There was cheering and a scream. They'd tied her to a pole and dragged her through the pink sands like a prize pig. It's not real, she cried. It was never real. We made it up. We made it the fuck up. I couldn't bear to look. Someone had a knife and another had a spear. Others were recording with their phones. The screaming grew shrill and panicked. Before it stopped, they left her roasting on the fire. Everyone wanted a part. Some of them were adoring fans. Others just wanted to see a woman burn. They sent out search parties to look for the others. Most tourists had stopped caring, instead resorting to rolling and mewling on the beach like animals in heat. I must have sat there for hours before somebody noticed me. A middle-aged man with wild hair and dark eyes. I couldn't see what he was chewing on, but it smelled like meat. Come sit by the fire, he said. It's perfect. I wanted to say no, to run, but I had to keep a low profile, or I'd be next. If I just pretended, I could at least get some time to figure out a plan. So despite my instincts screaming at me to flee, I swallowed my fear. All right, I said. I'll do that. He smiled at that, not giving it a second thought. They made a second fire in the sand. They danced and sang. Some of them had brought bottles, presumably with some kind of vodka. It was a torrential mess of impulses on display, everything from violence to carnality. I sat by the fire, hoping I had disappeared deep enough into the background for no one to notice. It seemed to work. I sat there, staring into the flames, where a crackling cranium stared back. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up long enough for the bone cinders to turn ashen and for the morning fog to roll in. It was like watching the island getting wrapped in a blanket, but there was something more to it now that I paid attention. There were people walking in and out of it, people coming and going. Some disappeared into the mist, while others appeared out of nowhere. There was no way boats or planes were coming, and going that fast. I could only draw one conclusion. Costa Rosa was, in no uncertain terms, not real. This couldn't be real. I wanted to give up. The others seemed to have it so easy. They just accepted it for what it was. Love, hate, violence. They could do it all and not feel a thing. But I was too close to it. I knew Costa Rosa for what it was, and no matter how many times I wandered into that morning fog, it wouldn't let me leave. That morning, I figured it out. The thing that had been bothering me. The passports. My fiancé and I hadn't renewed our passports. It would have been impossible for me to travel abroad. Somehow I must have known all along. Maybe that's why I wasn't as affected as the others. I had this gnawing reminder that I couldn't get out of my head. But now that I'd realized it, did that mean I was as susceptible as the rest of them? There were a lot of new faces. There, others came and went. Some were happy, just laying on the beach soaking up the sun. Others were hung from trees and skinned. It was an absurd mix of impressions. Two people walking hand in hand on the beach, discussing their favorite TV show. And by the tree line, a man making a dagger from a broken rib. I didn't get out of it unscathed either. There was this one woman who obsessed over my hair and tore out a fistful of it. One young man just went up to me and started kicking again and again until he got bored. I had rocks thrown at me, not with the intent of hurting me, but as to settle some kind of bet, a contest perhaps, but it was just starting. Every hour something was escalating, devolving. By nightfall, the luminescent waters ran red. People were tied to burning palm trees, leaving sizzling corpses behind. Some were howling at the sky and killing each other with sharpened flint, bone, and rock. They painted each other with ash and blood. Screaming and laughter intermingled, and I couldn't tell them apart. To them, it was all just a dream and nothing mattered. I found a hole and covered myself with palm fronds, hoping to wait out the night. I didn't want to take any chances. People were getting attacked left and right, and there was no telling what they might do if they noticed me. They were barely speaking anymore. Some were just screaming or barking at one another. A couple of coherent voices were screeching nonsense about a broken god and a rotting tree plucking the moon from the sky. Then a noise, my cell phone. I forgot I even had it. I thought the battery had run out long ago, but apparently it hadn't. The service was showing 0 bars, but I got a text message. I pulled it up, reading it inches from my face. It was from my fiancé. I know we need space, but I miss you. That's all there was. I tried to respond, but couldn't. No bars. I held the phone close to my chest, feeling my pulse tap against my hands. People were running back and forth, just a couple of feet from my hiding. Space. They were taking down trees, making rope, cutting down the island, each other and themselves. It was all just firewood to them. Then someone looked down. I could see a white eye through a space in the fronds. It was a young man, no older than 20. Half his head was shaved, with a deep cut going through his eyebrow. He kept getting blood in his left eye, making him spastically blink. "Little mole lady in her hidey hole," he said. "Is that as deep as you go?" I didn't say anything. I looked up at him, hoping he'd get bored if I didn't provoke him. But it did nothing. He just straightened his back and picked something up, something long and sharp. "Let's get you out of there, mole lady." A makeshift spear made from a plastic rod. The first stab struck my left bicep, poking into a nerve. The second strike hit inches from my ear, making a couple of strands of hair stick to the mud. The third strike dug into the edge of my shoulder, cutting a surface wound. It was all so fast that I didn't get to think. Before I could begin to kick and scream, something happened. The young man, like so many others, was attacked. A quick strike to the neck. He clutched his throat and collapsed into my hiding spot, warm blood pooling over my torso. Desperate fingers clawed at me, silently begging for help. His attacker walked up to get a better look. Turns out it was Jay. He looked at me and his victim. It's like it didn't even register with him. Jay had seen and done so much that this was like having breakfast. It was barely a conscious action. He leaned in a little to get a better look and smiled. He must have recognized me. As always, he wandered off. I lay there with a dying man on my chest and waited for it all to be over. I just had to make it through the night. I clutched my phone until my fingers clamped shut and closed my eyes. No sleep came to me, and a kaleidoscope of screams and cheers filled my mind with unspeakable images. But through it all I waited. People rushing by didn't really take notice. All they saw was a dead man, resting on a bed of palm fronds. By morning, I had a plan. People who bought into the fantasy of Costa Rosa seemed to come and go as they pleased. Every time that morning fog rolled in, something happened. So I was going to give it one final push. A real, honest attempt. I wandered down to the beach. The pain from my cuts and bruises was dull but ever present. A soft breeze touched my exposed hair. Then I took out my phone, turned it to selfie mode, and pressed record. And despite there being no bars, the video went live. "Hey," I said, mustering every bit of cheer I could. "Thanks for dropping in. Here I am, living the good life at Costa Rosa. Just look at this beach. Why'd you ever want to go? Home, right?" I didn't know whether anyone was watching. Maybe there was no one on the other end, but that camera felt like an eye looking straight through me. "Right?" I repeated. I held my smile for as long as I could. The video feed got cut and the battery died. Then a gunshot. A young man by the tree line at the edge of the morning fog. Same one who'd taken down Kim. Fucking vultures. I didn't even notice going down on one knee. I couldn't get back. Up. Clutching my stomach, I kicked and crawled away from the beach and into the ocean. Only then did I realize I'd been shot in the stomach. The salt stung my wound. Costa Rosa was perfect. It was beautiful. It was everything we needed it to be, and it would take me home. I just had to believe in it. I'd shown loyalty and it would reward me. It had to. Dear God, it had to. I took one final breath as my head dipped beneath the surface. Fog. In the sea. Distance between Costa Rosa and wherever we may be, there is a glimpse of something inhuman. Something that listens to what we want and makes it happen. Like we wished upon stars as kids, we wish upon likes and favorites as adults, praying they'll grant us our desperate wants. Money, love, fame. The same wishes, but different stars. They only gave us what we asked for. There was no malice, just an island in the sun. Salt water slipped into my ears. I could hear my heart slowing. A pressure built in my head as I sank, a fog draping over my eyes. I reached out, hoping. The fog parted. I was crawling. The sand had turned to concrete. A pleasant breeze turned to sudden cold. It was desolate and familiar. I'd walked up that driveway 1,000 times. I was home. I called out to my fiancé, and he heard me. And through the gunshot, the stab wounds and the bruises, a single soothing balm remained. I managed to say my thought out loud. I got your message. I'd been gone for days. I'd just walked out of the house and disappeared. No one had seen or heard it. I'd just been gone. They'd been looking for me. I tried keeping up with the others from the hospital. Most were dead. The baker had burned to death in her bed. Kim had been shot. Others fell asleep behind the wheel and destroyed themselves. But it didn't read as mysterious deaths, brought on by mysterious circumstance. It was all just the way. These things happen. People die in fires and cars every day. The bodies scream when we brought them back. Each time we brought the recently deceased back from the dead, they screamed. We didn't know why. The studies and preparation made sense in theory, and yet they screamed. Every time we injected the eye serum into a cadaver, it would awaken violently, thrashing if it hadn't been strapped down, and scream until it expired. I worked at a facility, one that specialized in the study of prolonged longevity, death, and the possible resurrection of dead tissue. We had developed a new compound that appeared capable of repairing and regenerating damaged cells back to full vitality. All our tests on animals showed miraculous results, lifespans extended by years, and in several cases, subjects were brought back from recent death. One rabbit, who came to us at the age of 12, lived for another 10 years within the lab. Once we were satisfied with the results, we began discussing human testing. Before moving on to live subjects, we wanted to see if we could bring back the recently deceased. We submitted the necessary requests for cadavers, and after navigating a mess of paperwork and red tape, established a steady stream of bodies kept on ice. The individuals sent to us had died from known diseases and had been marked for scientific use. We tried to ensure that the brain had not fully degraded, so we required the bodies to be no more than a few days, at most a week, post-mortem. The first test was catastrophic. Generally, when we applied the serum to animals, the body would convulse slightly and, as if waking from sleep, the creature would open its eyes and look at us. One dog we tested even wagged its tail in excitement at the sight of us. But for the first human subject, excitement was the last thing on its mind. We laid the male subject out on a table, modesty underwear placed on them for decency. Once prepared, we injected the compound at the base of the skull and waited, usually 30 seconds to a minute, for the serum to begin rebuilding neural tissue. Our theory suggested we'd awaken a conscious person, albeit brain dead. Our hope was to see them fully restored. Both were wrong. The subject tensed its entire body before a wave of movement flowed from the neck, down the arms, and through to the feet, as if in one smooth motion, the soul had slid back into its flesh. The hands gripped the sides of the table. The head twitched, every muscle fiber firing in chaotic, distorted spasms. His heartbeat began to pulse on our equipment, sending freshly created blood through the body. We watched in stunned amazement. As the body took a long, deep breath, we smiled at the results. We did it. Suddenly it lurched forward, its upper half snapping upright like a sprung trap. Its face contorted, mouth gaping wide, eyes bulging from their sockets, nostrils flared. Then the screaming began. It was a distorted scream, not unearthly, though it could be described as such. But that was only because the sound destroyed its own vocal cords and esophagus under the sheer strain of what it was trying to emit. It was the sound of an animal fighting with every fiber of its being to escape. The scream filled the small room, reverberating through the glassware, tearing through me, and likely everyone present. It peaked as the body began to shake violently, its hands clawing at its own flesh as if something unseen had gripped it. From the inside, the legs trembled with frenetic energy, as if they were desperate to run before twisting violently to one side. A sickening crack signaled the snapping of the hip. The body collapsed, falling from the table, its head striking the cold floor with a wet smack. The screaming dragged on for another 5 frail seconds, then stopped with a final broken whimper. Revitalized blood began to pool from the fractured skull, the leg bent at an unnatural angle. The noise that had escaped from that corpse felt like something being burned alive or torn apart. Not that I know what those things sound like, but I imagine that would be the closest approximation. I wanted to end the tests there and then, but the others insisted we'd had a breakthrough and we had to see it completed. With the second subject, we took no risks. He was strapped tightly to the bench before we began. Another male, mid-40s, dead from a heart attack. My own body tensed in anticipation of what was to come. The injection was administered and, much like the first, the body responded with small, twitching bursts of energy before the spasms began. Bound at the limbs and forehead, its movements were restricted, but not silenced. No amount of hearing protection could shield us from the guttural growls and screams that forced their way out of the subject's throat. The entire table rattled. Beneath him, restraints tightening and tearing deep into the flesh as freshly reanimated blood began to leak from the wounds. Between each shriek and convulsion, the mouth snapped open and shut violently until the tongue was chewed and torn apart. The subject choked on his own blood less than a minute after revival. We had been instructed to intervene only if the subject could be reasonably calmed. If they expired again, the company would simply supply more bodies and more funding. It didn't matter. The sex, the race, the build, the age, the health before death, or how they died. They all came back screaming. After staggering through weeks of what could only be described as unholy experiments, we began testing different methods to sedate and prolong the body's post-reanimation. One attempt stood out. We purposely severed the vocal cords of a cadaver before revival, hoping to silence the inevitable screaming. She was a woman, middle-aged, and already pale from death. When she awoke, there were tears already welling in, her eyes as if her mind remembered something her body hadn't yet caught up with. Her breathing came fast and shallow, accelerating into panicked, rasping sobs, wet, desperate gulps of air like someone drowning in the open. Though she couldn't scream, the sounds she made were worse. Muffled cries slipped from her ruined throat, each one a garbled echo of agony that sent shivers through every person in the room. The moans of pain, of disbelief, grief, recognition. Her eyes darted wildly, bloodshot and filled with terror, locking onto each of us in turn as if begging for help or mercy, perhaps both. She tried to lift her arms, but the restraints held her down. Instead, she writhed, shuddering uncontrollably, her body convulsing in silent torment. The tears flowed freely now, tracking down her cheeks in trembling rivulets. We had silenced her voice, but we hadn't silenced the pain. If anything, it made it worse, watching her suffer without the outlet to scream. The room was filled with the sound of breath and whimpers, and something else, a low, involuntary whine that came not from her, but from one of the assistants. Curled slightly in the corner, unable to look, we disposed of the subject humanely. The effect on the staff was undeniable. Conversation shortened, small talk faded, and laughter disappeared entirely. The jokes we once shared over coffee about playing God felt horrific, even dangerous to say aloud. Soon, silence became our default. We spoke only when necessary, and only about work. Every day we showed up, ran the tests, documented the results, and went home. No one asked questions. The sense of camaraderie we'd built during the animal trials dissolved. The feeling of triumph, of being on the cusp of something extraordinary, turned to quiet dread. The resignations came quietly, one by one. No formal farewells, just an empty desk the next morning. Their replacements arrived with wide eyes and excitement, but that never lasted long. Due to the confidentiality clauses in our contracts, I wasn't allowed to contact any of them after they left. I never found out what happened to most of them. But I do remember one clearly. James, a close friend of mine. He was quiet in his final weeks at work, barely spoke, barely ate. Then one day, he didn't come in. Then I saw the news. He had jumped from the top of his apartment building. I thought about quitting, I really did. But the raise they gave me was too good to leave. Our results were yielding nothing. Every subject we brought back either screamed, wailed, or violently, thrashed before eventually expiring, or being put down. With permissions, we began to explore the unconventional. We dabbled in pseudoscience and religious dogmata. Anything that might offer an answer science could not. The people we brought in were paid obscene amounts and sworn to absolute secrecy. Toward the end, even threats were issued. One hypnotist, an odd woman with steady hands and tired eyes, was brought in to help calm the subjects. Her role was to attempt to induce a calm state as we gradually reanimated, stimulating isolated regions of the brain one at a time while keeping the rest dormant. A while it seemed promising. We ran countless sessions, and on one occasion, after several attempts and enough sedatives to drop an elephant, a subject stirred gently under hypnosis. There was a breath, a shallow, ragged gasp of pained air squeezed through clenched teeth. Then, a single word. Why? It was faint, barely audible, a tremble of soul-deep confusion and grief. And then, the screaming returned, more feral and violent than before. The subject convulsed so hard the restraints tore deep into the flesh. The hypnotist never returned after that session. She didn't even collect her final pay. After her, we were truly desperate. We brought in a priest, an aging man with a cautious demeanor, willing to participate in hopes of finding some sort of answer. None of us were superstitious, but something in the screaming had begun to strip away our rationality, our sense of detachment. It felt as though each reanimation peeled back another layer of our humanity, leaving something hollow and shaking beneath. The priest performed a full exorcism over the cadaver as it reanimated. He held a crucifix above its chest and muttered Latin gospels with trembling conviction. Strangely, the body responded. It strained violently against the restraints, muscles, taut as steel cords, but it didn't scream. Not at first. The priest's words seemed to still it, but only for a moment. Then the corpse snapped upright with terrifying force, tearing free of the table as metal bolts ripped from the floor. It lunged, flailing wildly. The priest stumbled back, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow to the head, and managed to escape, with no significant injury. What followed was not panic, but fury. He shouted at us, eyes wild, accusing us of blasphemy. "You're dragging sinners from hell," he screamed. "You're summoning torment, not salvation." His voice cracked as he ranted and raved, his tone eerily echoing the corpses we'd brought back. Then he left, stormed out of the facility, never to return. From that point on, armed guards were stationed in every session. Not that it mattered. The sessions didn't last long after that anyway. For one final try, one more attempt to gain any understanding, we turned away from the mystical and into even more eccentric science. We selected an elderly subject, late 90s, died of natural causes, a quiet death with no visible trauma. We surgically detached his spinal column from the base of the brain, severing all motor function. The body was essentially quadriplegic, incapable of movement or speech. Only the essential organ connections were maintained. Then we installed a neural interface, an experimental chip connected directly to the brainstem and visual cortex, linked to a computer in the adjacent observation room. It was programmed to interpret neural signals and convert them into written text. Only a few of us remained by this point. We sat in silence behind the thick glass, monitors glowing faintly in the dim observation room. The only other person present inside the subject's room was the armed guard, now a permanent fixture, with orders to terminate the subject immediately if necessary. We administered the injection and waited. There were no spasms, no strained limbs, no hideous sounds of vocal cords tearing, just the soft, rhythmic beep of a heart restarting and the subtle rise and fall of a chest drawing breath. The room was so silent, it felt as though the screams of the previous cadavers echoed from memory into the still air. Then, the text flashed on screen. "Where am I?" We froze. Even though it was only text, something in my mind gave it life. I heard the voice behind it, an old man, tired, confused. We typed back, "Who are you?" "John Forrester." "Who are you?" "We're here to help, John." "How old are?" "Sayos 96. Who are you?" The information matched. We were finally getting somewhere. Then the next message appeared. "Are you him?" We paused. "Who?" There was a long silence. Then, "You're not him." "No. No, no." John's heart rate began to climb. The breathing grew rapid. His test flashed again. "You're not supposed to know." We stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. My assistant looked at me, her mouth slightly open, but I said nothing. "You're not supposed to know," he repeated. I looked through the window. John's eyes were open, wide, wet, unblinking. Tears streamed down his cheeks, pooling on the slab beneath. Here it shouldn't have been possible. "He won't let me back. You're not supposed to know." The cursor blinked. I turned to the screen again, only to see another message. "He won't let you." Pause. "He won't let you." Again, and again, and again. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, matching the BPM displayed on the monitor. My breathing grew shallow. Then I heard something, not in my mind, real sound. I looked up. John's mouth was moving. Impossible. His nerves were severed, his lips parted wider. Sound emerged, quiet at first, but real, tangible. "He won't let you." I froze. I shouldn't be able to hear it through the glass, but I heard it. The guard looked to me for the termination signal. I shook my head. "Not yet. He won't let you." The whisper grew in volume, ragged and forced from a throat that should have been silent. "He won't let you. He 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 won't let you." The gunshot was final, absolute. The sound rang out across the lab like a gavel, striking the lid of a coffin. John's body slumped against the slab, what remained of his expression frozen in wide-eyed agony. The guard, shaking, holstered his weapon and left the room without a word. The silence that followed was suffocating. I collapsed back into my chair. My ears rang, not from the shot, but from the absence of everything else. No monitors, no voices, no screams, just silence. I didn't know what to report. I didn't know what I just witnessed. The project was terminated soon after, officially deemed a dead end. We were compensated generously, bonuses, severance, hush clauses buried in legalese. More than enough to vanish, to start over, to never work again. But money does nothing for the silence. I sit here now, alone, typing these words, surrounded by a silence so heavy it feels alive, suffocating, endless. To fill that silence, my mind conjures John's voice lingering on his words. I now wish for the screaming instead.